Hi, this time I'm going to talk about two characters of the visual novel The House in Fata Morgana. If you haven't seen my video where I talked about that awesome visual novel, I'm going to put the link in the description below. I recommend that you check that out. It's a spoiler-free video, so if you want to know what the game is about, I recommend that you watch that. But this particular video where I talk about two of the characters, Mell and Nellie, is going to contain spoilers. So this video is more focused on showing what I think of the characters to those that have already played the visual novel, or if you don't have plans on playing The House in Fata Morgana, you could also watch this video. I think it will give you some great examples, especially if you play tabletop role-playing games, because for those that are new to my channel, I talk mainly about tabletop role-playing games and other tabletop games as well. But the lives of Nellie and Mell, they are a really good example on how to introduce drama and tragedy in a story. Maybe you play the Ghastly Affair role-playing game. I think that game is perfect to introduce these elements of tragedy and drama, even though in that game you do have some combat encounters and such. You can still play the drama part a bit more eminently. So let's get started. I had a bit of a difficult time thinking if I should talk about the past or the more future lives of Nellie and Mell, because in the House in Fata Morgana there is reincarnation. So I guess I would start at the more recent events, just like the game portrays it. When you first become introduced to Nellie and Mell, you can see that there is some sort of problem or issue in their relationship as a brother and sister. Right from the very start, you can see that there is something that is unspoken between them. And one comment that points out some of, I guess you could say, the major flaw in the relationship is made by this person by the name of Nellie Rhodes, the dearest princess of Prince Mell. Hi, Nellie. This person, as you can tell, is a pretty big fan of the House in Fata Morgana, and she commented that Nellie could have been just a lovable sister towards Mell, but she went kind of berserk for him later on. And the fact that she, along with another character in the final chapter, she found her happiest moments, but then there was tragedy. And you will see how that plays into the equation as I talk about the story of Mell and Nellie. So you basically have a big issue here. Nellie is... Not only does she want to see Mell as something that he isn't really, but she also develops sort of like an incest sort of thing towards Mell. You could say that it's a bit more innocent, but she does have an affection that doesn't typically exist between brother and sister. You have a Game of Thrones situation going on there, but it's more one-sided. Even though Mell does care a lot for Nellie, she becomes somewhat obsessed with him. I think this shows a lot of a problem that perhaps many people in the world experience, and that is they do not see reality as it is. Because on the side of Mell, instead of having a conversation with his little sister, telling her that I'm not the prince that you think that I am, I'm just a guy trying to get by or get through different situations, he never gets that talk with Nellie. So there is some sort of distortion as to how they look at life. And maybe that also points to the flaws in Nellie's love for her brother. Instead of loving her brother as an imperfect person, perhaps there is a potential in Mel to become a true Prince Charming or a great guy. She ignores his flaws and tries to put pressure on him, always talking to him as if he's some sort of perfect prince. And on the side of Mel, instead of accepting his faults and trying to set things straight with Nellie, he plays along. He tries to act as the Prince Charming or the perfect prince that Nellie thinks that he is, and that gets him into a lot of trouble because he is not honest with himself and with Nellie, and he never gets a full grasp on his own capabilities and gets going deeper and deeper into problems, and you will see why as I talk about the character. This sort of like platonic incest relationship goes on for a bit until a mysterious new maid arrives at their household. They are in this current time frame, which is it's somewhat difficult to point out. It seems to be on the Renaissance side of things. They receive this new maid, and she's obviously of a lower birth. She's basically an Abigail, just there to work on the house and serve the masters of the house while educating herself. But Mel develops a crush on her. And I'm not going to go into too much detail when it comes to this maid. Many of you know that this maid is a manifestation, you could say, of Morgana. But Mel develops a crush on her, even though she has ill intentions towards Mel. She's basically on a quest for revenge. It is the fault of Mel's family that her father had a miserable life and died. So she's basically became a maid to get her revenge on Mel. But Nellie notices that Mel is paying attention to this new maid, to this manifestation of Morgana. So she becomes a bit obsessed. She doesn't want to interact with people outside the house. She basically wants to cling to her older brother. You know how it is in noble houses that sometimes to create alliances, they get their children to marry the children of friends and allies and business partners and such. So this is what is going on with Nellie. She's kind of getting forced to hook up with a guy. That guy, it's never quite clear to me if he's actually a good person or a bad person, because Nellie does act quite rude towards him. She never like tries to kindly turn him aside. Because she's too focused on Mel, has that get away from me attitude with the other guy. So he obviously retaliates later on with some pretty harsh words. So you never can tell if he's actually a bad person or if he's just like retaliating against Nellie's dismissal, to put it in a way. And Nellie strikes or lashes out at this white-haired girl that is the new maid. She's quite mysterious. She has red eyes and white hair. There is an explanation to that, but I will not cover that in this video. And she takes it all out on this new maid, the object of Mel's affections. So obviously Mel strikes back at Nellie, and there is a rift in the relationship. And in her obsession, Nellie visits that white girl's room in the night, and she basically attacks her. She cuts her hair, the white hair of this maid, and Nellie, in her desperation, she ties the hair over her own hair, and she visits Mel during the night, and she starts to make out with him. And because it's dark and he only takes a look and he sees this white hair, he thinks that it's the maid paying a visit, but later, almost immediately, he realizes that it's actually his sister Nellie. And so he runs out of his room searching for the white-haired girl, the maid that I was telling you, but she has left the household and she goes missing, and they never recover from that. Nellie becomes sick after getting I think she got married to that other guy that I was telling you about, and she dies, and Mel became sort of like a priest or a monk. So it was quite tragic. And when you first start playing the game, you think that this is also unfair and you cannot find a cause to why everything happened like this. But later in the game, where you get to visit their former lives, as I was telling you, in this game there is a lot of reincarnation. You go in a certain way, you go to the past and you get to see how Nellie and Mel were in their former lives. They were also noble children. However, their parents died, and a very greedy relative took all of their inheritance and just cast them off to the street. And this is pretty much killing someone who has been pampered throughout their lives, and suddenly you send them to the street to survive on their own with a miserable sum of money. And it was like killing them almost. And on the side of Mel and Nellie, it was pretty much suicide, just going outside into the world without no preparation at all. Imagine having all of those servants doing things for you, and suddenly you are cast out like that. Very dangerous situation. You could also say that Mel was at fault because he didn't do something. Perhaps some drastic measures were needed. Again, Game of Thrones, maybe he needed to poison that uncle that did that to him, or do some Machiavellic maneuvers to secure his future with Nellie's future. You could say, well, he was quite young, but there are some remarkable young people in the world. You just need to have the will and the intelligence to try to work something out. Like, for example, take a look at the lives of Hattori Hanzo and Miyamoto Musashi. When they were quite young, they accomplished great things. So I think that it would have been great if Mel took some sort of violent or questionable action against that greedy family member that did that to him and his sister. He should have, maybe he should have done that for the sake of his sister and also for himself, not just letting things to move along with him being all passive. And you can see how in the past, in their lives, they are trying to survive, but they are quite incompetent in different, capturing animals to eat and preparing them and cooking them. They are not suited for that task. They have great difficulty in doing some things that would be ordinary for other more down to earth, I guess you could say, kind of people. And then Nellie gets sick. It's obvious as well, if they have no knowledge in medicine and very little knowledge when it comes to health, or maybe it was genetic, who knows. Nellie becomes sick and Mel doesn't know how to cure her. However, he hears this rumor about a witch living by the lake, Morgana, and he goes and visits Morgana, the witch, asking for some sort of miracle cure to save Nellie. And this is where you can see some of the finer points or virtues of Mel. Morgana, if I do a video of Morgana later on, in the future, I will talk about why she is like that, but you can see that she's, I wouldn't call her disfigured, but she has a really horrible skin, almost like a leprous condition. It's obvious that some sort of bacteria has attacked her skin. It looks quite bad. But despite that, Mel treats her like a normal girl because she's quite young. This witch is really young. And Mel treats her like that, not just because he wants a cure, he's just that way with her. Even when he's not asking for her help, he's just visiting her and taking walks along the lake. And Morgana is quite surprised and pleased with this. Everybody has been shunning her, treating her like some sort of supernatural aberration or something. Even though there is a bit of an arrogance, I guess you could say, in Morgana, that she actually believes that she's some sort of saint. But I won't get too much into that in this video. Maybe in a future video I will talk about that. So Eventually, Morgana reveals to Mel a darker part, I guess you could say, of her legend or her mystery, that her blood actually heals people. So she decides to help Mel, giving her blood to Nellie, because Nellie is very sick, and when she receives the blood from Morgana, she gets better. But you could say that perhaps it's a sort of like a placebo effect. There are many mysteries in the house in Fata Morgana. There is a subtle magic. You never know what's actually magical and what is actually more on the psychological side of things, or maybe it's a little bit of both. But she heals up, at least for a time, and so Mel is quite grateful, and he develops sort of like a relationship, perhaps a hint of romance with Morgana. And this really shows you how there is some sort of greater perception in Mel. He manages to see past the skin condition of Morgana and see the true beauty within. However, Nellie gets sick again, and even worse, they are visited by a probably what I would consider the worst character in the House in Fata Morgana visual novel. It's actually a very interesting and complex character, but of all of them, I think he's the one with more vicious. He's a very vicious character and does not actively pursue some sort of virtuous way of living. He's Yukimasa. Now, Yukimasa is a monster. He's an insane beast. He looks like a calm and calculating guy, but he's a killer, a psychopath. He's hungry to slash and cut and pierce. I'm definitely going to make a video about him and another character later on in the future, and then I will talk about him. But he is looking for Morgana. He has been ordered by the Lord of the Land to search for this witch that has healing properties in her blood. So he barges into Mel's house and demands that he guide him to Morgana. This is another part where Mel shows some of his virtue, his bravery. He's willing to. He doesn't care about his life as long as he can keep Morgana safe from this evil person, Yukimasa. But then Yukimasa threatens to kill his sister Nellie, and this is when Mel falters and he decides to guide Yukimasa to Morgana's little cottage by the lake. When they actually get there, Mel is told by Yukimasa to trick Morgana to say that he's visiting, that hi Morgana, I'm here to hang out with you or whatever. And when Morgana opens her door, Yukimasa enters and chops off Morgana's arm. It wasn't necessary to do that. You can see how Yukimasa is quite thirsty or hungry for some butchery. So Yukimasa captures Morgana. As she is bleeding out, he manages to stop the bleeding, but still it's quite surprising that she didn't die from shock or from bleeding out. And Yukimasa gives Mel the arm of Morgana. He basically, like a butcher at the butcher shop, gives the arm to Mel and tells him, here, you can use the blood from this arm to heal your sister. So Yukimasa goes on his way with Morgana, and Mel is now an accomplice in this vile deed, in this kidnapping of Morgana. He, in a disgusted way, throws that chopped up of arm into the lake, and he feels miserable because of what he has done. He goes back to Nellie, and Nellie does not fully recover. She manages to stave off, I guess you could say, the infection, thanks to the help of another character that I will talk about in another video. But now Mel is one of the three people that know what has happened to Morgana, being Mel, Yukimasa, and the Lord of the Land. And Morgana is locked away in a tower, and because Mel is an accomplice, he's given one of the three keys to the locks that keep Morgana in the tower. So now Mel becomes part of this criminal act, If things went along as historically in the game, this is how things end up. Morgana is kept in the tower. She's being milked of her blood, bled out by the ruler of the land, and her blood is used as some sort of miracle cure, all for the sake of the economy of the city. This draws a lot of people in, thinking that there is this miracle cure for all of their diseases. But later on, there is a riot, an uprising, and during that uprising, many characters die, and coincidentally, or maybe it's part of fate, Nellie dies from her disease during that riot. And I don't remember if they explicitly mention it, but I think that Mell dies during that riot too. But the main character, Michel, and I will talk about him in another video, there is a chance for him to go back in time, but not exactly. That is, what has happened cannot be changed. However, the minds of those that have participated in that, their spirits, in a way they are modified by the actions that Michel took in that alternate past or alternate timeline. And you can see when Michel interacts with Mell and Nellie, he manages to help them. That is, if you get the good ending, you manage to help them see the error of their ways, of having an open talk or discussion about how Nellie should stop looking at Mell as if he's some sort of Prince Charming and so brave and strong and all of that, when he actually is not. I believe that he has the potential to become that, but you cannot become that which you are not if you ignore your own flaws. On the side of Mell, he should be more mature. He should accept that he has many flaws and correct Nellie every time she's calling him like, oh, my dear Prince Mell, and all of that. Tell her that stop treating him like this, that he still has a long way to go before actually becoming that sort of virtuous person or man. I think many people perhaps could despise the character that Mell represents, because many times he's also quite cowardly, and it's because he refuses to see that cowardice in himself. I think that he fails to correct himself many times. He's even willing to hurt other people as long as he can keep that facade. There is actually an ending, if I'm not mistaken, where he basically can kill the main character just because the main character has exposed him for what he is. So let's look a bit, get a bit psychological or philosophical as to why Nellie and Mell act like this. On the side of Nellie, I think it is tragic and also understandable as to why she would want to see Mell as this valiant prince, because that would give her security. Imagine just being two characters that were just those children of noble blood that were just cast out into the world with no hope of surviving, basically. And if she believes that Mell is some sort of prince that knows everything and is capable of doing everything, then she feels great security. So it's actually also, I think it's not only a twisted love to see him like that, but it's also that she's too afraid to admit the possibility that Mell is not prepared to help them both. And that would also mean that she will also have to try even harder to try to survive. So I think on the side of Nellie, it is her fear of feeling insecurity, of not having this prince that you can rely on, that she decides to look at Mell as some sort of idolized version rather than who he actually is. And you can see how all of this developed in the curse of the house in Fata Morgana, because when Morgana dies, after bleeding out of course, you see why in their reincarnation, Nellie and Mell are forced to live through a tragedy that makes a sort of mockery of their love for each other, that develops in some sort of incest. You could also say that the curse in Fata Morgana is also related to her blood. It is obvious that Morgana is sick, and they start giving out her blood as some sort of miracle cure while she herself is sick. They were actually getting all people in town sick, so they were spreading a disease. So you can see why this happened. And on the side of Mell, he had to work towards his upbringing. It's obvious that as a noble, his parents didn't properly educate him as to how to survive in the world of nobility and in the world in general. They should have taught him a lot of, let's say, Machiavellian strategies and tactics about all of the backstabbing and intrigue that happened in that environment. And Mell is a perfect example of what a man must do when he is becoming more mature or developing as a person. If you remain with that childlike mentality, thinking that you're some sort of Prince Charming when you are actually not, reality will hit you like a ton of bricks. You can have dreams and ambitions and be optimistic, but you must always be mindful of your flaws, because there is no escape from reality. If you could say, oh, gravity does not exist and I can float around if I want to, if you walk off a cliff, you're going to fall down the cliff. There is no way around it. But it is through your intelligence and willpower that you could find some ways of realizing your dreams. Maybe you cannot float down the cliff, but maybe later on you get interested in jumping on parachute or using parachute, or maybe you decide to become a pilot, and in that way you can actually float. Get it? So it's about not losing that grip with reality. So I think that's the main problem with Nellie and Mell. At the end of the visual novel of the Housing Fata Morgana, there is a section where you can see what the designers of the game or the writer thinks of the different characters, like the underlying philosophy behind the character design. But to me, Nellie and Mell are a personification of not having a firm grasp on reality and being quite afraid of looking at reality. Nellie is so afraid of not having this perfect prince protecting her, and Mell is so afraid of not being that prince that everything results in a terrible tragedy. I hope Manga Gamer, the company that translated the Housing Fata Morgana, brings the other visual novels to the West, because there is another part of the visual novel that brings a bit of closure, and you can see a happy ending concerning different characters. But I think there are many lessons that Nellie and Mell have for us. I think that's part of the charm of the characters in the Housing Fata Morgana. They are so imperfect and flawed that it's very easy to identify with them, and they give so many lessons about life in general. So I hope you enjoyed this video where I talk about those two awesome, amazing characters despite all of their flaws, their imperfect nature. And I hope maybe if you play role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games, you can create some interesting characters or personas using Nellie and Mell as inspiration or an example. In fact, I think that part where Nellie basically assaults Mell at night reminds me a bit of when Arthur and Morgana had Modred. Maybe that's a bit of a tribute to that. And on the other side of things, on the more important side of things, maybe Nellie and Mell will have some lessons for you when it comes to your own life, that you should always keep a firm grasp on reality. You see everything with its imperfections and its flaws. Maybe you think that something is great, and when you manage to see all of those errors and flaws, you still think that is actually great and you can make things even better. But maybe you think that something is great, and when you actually take a critical look at that, it could be some sort of ideology, a situation, place, person, you can see that that thing is actually not great. And you were fooling yourself all along. You were so hungry to see something as a fantasy version of itself or herself or himself or whatever, that sometimes you start losing your mind. So it's always important to see things how they are. Thanks for watching this video, and if you have any comments or questions, please let me know, especially those that have already played the house in Fata Morgana and you have a different opinion on Mell and Nellie, or maybe I missed something vital about their lives or their lessons. Maybe anything that I missed, write it down in the comment section below, or make a video response, or whatever you like. I will be looking forward to your comments. Once again, thanks for watching and see you later.